In anticipation, you've gone silent already. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please stand for the arrival of their Excellencies, the Governor-General of the Commonwealth of Australia and Mrs. Linda Hurley.
Good morning, please be seated. Thank you. Well, a warm welcome from Linda and I and the staff here at Government House, Yarralumla. Absolutely delighted to have you here this morning for a launch of a very, very special week in Australia. But I begin though by acknowledging that Yarralumla sits on the land of the Honourable people. If you're Canberran, you'll know how beautiful this part of the country is. And with the Madji down to the south, Brindabellas and Murrumbidgee, we do thank the Ngunnawal people for looking after it for us for generation after generation, and pay respect to elders past and present, and particularly looking after the younger generation coming through at the moment, who are our pathway to the future of this country. Could I acknowledge we have with us today Mrs. Anne Hollins, the National Children's Commissioner, Detective Superintendent Jane Crosling, and Commander Hilda Sirik from ACE and Human Exploitation at Australian Federal Police, Ms. Teresa Scott, President of the National Association for Prevention of Child Abuse and Neglect, and members of the board, the CEO, Mr. Richard Cook, distinguished guests. As I say, a real privilege for us to welcome you to Government House for what continues to be a very, very important week in our national calendar. Of course, we'd wish for a time when this week was not necessary, no longer a requirement to considering a special week to set aside for National Child Protection. But it is necessary at the moment, and I know that people in this room and those watching are not blind to the magnitude of the problem we face here in Australia. As patron of the National Association for the Prevention of Child Abuse and Neglect, I hold in high esteem all who dedicate their working hours and indeed more to promoting the safety and well-being of our children. Child protection is an extremely challenging sector in which to work. It requires many different skill sets, enormous passion, and enormous empathy to produce an effective and sustainable system. So thank you for all that you do. And today, as we launch the National Child Protection Week for 2022, it's really an opportunity for us all to recommit to the work that you undertake and to support you in it. The people in this room know some of the statistics by heart, I would say. Right now in Australia, 1 in 6 children are living in poverty, and 46,000 children in Australia living out of home care, with an overrepresentation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. These figures are indeed alarming, and they should alarm us all. There's clearly much more work to be done to reduce the impact on our children and indeed through them, our communities. In recent discussions on this issue, I mean, Linda and I were absolutely shocked, I think early last year, talking to Anne and some others involved in out-of-home care, the number of children in our capital cities who are housed in hotels overnight, and their only relationship is someone who comes in, clocks in for every 8 hours. I think if Australians knew that and understood that, the depths of the issues we are facing would just be so stark. Fancy having children who live in hotels and then they're let loose during the daytime. Not good enough. It's in all our interests that every child thrives. NAPCAM's theme for National Child Protection Week this year, I think, will resonate with the community. Every child in every community needs a fair go. And of course, that strikes at the heart of who we are as Australians. We believe in a fair go. And for the most fragile, the most vulnerable, even more so. Children and young people thrive when, of course, when they grow up in a safe community, they're respected, they're connected, they're supported. Positive relationships built with children are critical to their well-being. And they have the right to grow up with those relationships in an environment that supports their ambitions, their aspirations, but more so listens to what their aspirations are. We know that's not the case for far too many children. We know the data, and that's why this week, I think, is just so important to us. But of course, the conversations don't end in a week. It's not a week of that's it. It's just an opportunity, I think, to elevate the issue in the public's mind, in the policymakers' mind, about what we are facing in Australia. So we need to have the conversations this week, but every week, to drive the development of policy and practice to support our children. We, as a society, need to make sure we do everything we can do to help these children thrive. Again, I commend all of you working in this sector for your dedication as individuals, community members, volunteers, supporters, workers, to help create communities that support families and children. I'll just go off script slightly. I presented or spoke to the Create Foundation conference in Adelaide this year. And I just go back to that point I made about relationships. I think these are absolutely critical to how we establish our policy and our practice with children. Far be it for me to be critical, but I think sometimes, we can focus on youth, our children, as economic units or economic productivity units. They're not. They're children desperately in need of relationships, role models, care, love, a cuddle. This is how we bring them to being, fulfilling their dreams, their ambitions. So let me repeat, we're looking after 1 in 6 Australian children in poverty, 46,000 children in out-of-home care, with a majority or overrepresentation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. This week needs to make sure that message is very clear to people and why we need to look hard at the system we are using. It's easy to say Australia can do better than that, but it's harder to do it. But please, I commend you for what you're doing. We must improve. So thank you. I wish you a very successful National Child Protection Week and the gathering, seminars, conferences, discussions, events that will surround it. Again, we know, though, it is a week to concentrate on it, but it is not the week of it. And please continue the great work you do. So on that note, it's now my pleasure to officially launch National Child Protection Week 2022. And I'll hand over to the National Children's Commissioner for more words of wisdom. Thank you.
His Excellency General the Honourable David Hurley AC, DSC, Governor-General of Australia, and Her Excellency Mrs. Linda Hurley. Thank you so much for launching National Child Protection Week 2022. And thanks for having us here at your house, our house. There's such a buzz in the air as people were arriving. It's always exciting to be here. So thank you so much, and so nice to see many familiar faces here today. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land, the Ngunnawal people, and pay my respect to their elders, past, present and emerging, and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today here and online, and a special call out to all the children and young people who might be joining us. Thank you to the Board of NAPCAN for inviting me to speak today. National Child Protection Week is an important time to focus our attention on the rights and well-being of Australia's children and their families and communities. The theme for Child Protection Week invites us to reflect on the fact that every child in every community needs a fair go. The theme also reminds us that sadly, we're still a long way from achieving this goal. I will argue that in Australia, the well-being of children is not a national priority. That today children are at risk of harm because the basic systems that are meant to provide support continue to fail them. And that because of these systemic failures, we as a country are currently unable to give every child a fair go. The key human rights challenge affecting children in Australia is the fragmentation and failure of our basic systems that are meant to support children and their families, especially those living with poverty and disadvantage. Urgent cross-portfolio reform is needed across health, education and social services, including housing and income security, to ensure that these basic systems are fit for purpose and can help families to keep their children safe and well. As His Excellency mentioned, in Australia, you're more likely to live in poverty if you're a child. 1 in 6 children lives in poverty. Child poverty is well known to be a risk factor connected to many lifelong harms. This is being addressed elsewhere in the world, such as the nations of the European Union that have made a shared commitment to combat child poverty and exclusion through their Child Guarantee national action plans. Our Jobs and Skills Summit last week, it was noted that the learning gap between students from disadvantaged and advantaged backgrounds more than doubles between Year 3 and Year 9. According to the OECD, 20% of 15-year-olds lack sufficient literacy skills to participate effectively in everyday activities that require reading and writing. Suicide has been for many years the leading cause of death for children and young people aged 5 to 17, with First Nations children disproportionately affected. And Australia ranks a low 32nd out of 38 OECD countries on child wellbeing. Like many developed countries, other developed countries, we have no national roadmap to improve child health, learning and wellbeing. What we do have is a chronic crisis in our child protection and youth justice systems. We don't often focus on the children and youth detention centres in Child Protection Week, but it's important to remember that most of these children have come via the child protection system and they are in need of care and protection. 20 suicide attempts and 285 occasions of self-harm in the first 6 months of this year alone in the Banksia Hill Youth Detention Centre in WA. These children have been frequently locked down in isolation in their cells for more than 22 hours per day, deprived of education, recreation and rehabilitation in a system that has failed. While Banksia Hill requires urgent intervention, it's sadly not isolated. 5 years on from the Northern Territory Royal Commission, the serious problems in youth justice systems continue right across Australia. Official reports have repeatedly described the treatment of children in some youth detention centres as inhumane and degrading. Recently, we heard horrifying accounts of child sexual abuse and what can only be described as torture of children at Tasmania's Ashley Youth Detention Centre. I'll quote the counsel assisting the Tasmanian Commission of Inquiry in her closing remarks a week ago. She said, "There appears to be a lack of urgency from the government to change the situation for these children. A failure to act now will see children continue to be subjected to inhumane and degrading conditions and continue to be at risk of child sex abuse. Children in youth detention need care and treatment for complex neurological disabilities, trauma, and serious mental health problems. Instead of receiving the care they need, too many children are incarcerated in harmful conditions with lifelong negative effects, and they're not provided with rehabilitation and the support they need to integrate back into the community on release. So they come back again and again and again. These children come from families living with poverty and disadvantage. They are disproportionately First Nations children, and some are only 10 years old. I've spoken with many of these children when I visited these prisons. It was distressing and heartbreaking, and I'm still haunted by these conversations. Australia is out of step internationally, and the public needs to know the truth. We are wasting public money because locking up children does not reduce crime. Other countries have implemented community-based welfare approaches shown to reduce youth offending and to keep the community safer. This community-based early intervention and support works better to reduce youth offending than even the best rehabilitation programs provided in prisons. Let's be clear, the chronic crisis in Australia's youth justice system is an outcome of our policies and basic service systems that are failing to provide children and their families with the support they need, leading to more children coming into child protection and youth justice. In our Keeping Kids Safe and Well national consultations with children and their families for the new National Framework for Protecting Australia's Children, I heard that basic support systems are fragmented and not fit for purpose. We need to redesign our basic services by listening to children and families about what will help them. Children say they want to go to school, but they feel they don't belong, and families don't feel welcome. OECD research has found that students from families with higher socioeconomic status are more likely to feel a sense of belonging at school. In Australia, this gap has grown wider, and we know that disengagement from education is a key risk factor for serious problems like youth crime. The question is, what are we doing to prevent the escalation of these problems? Do we understand the urgency to act on the evidence? And are we redesigning the way schools operate to embrace local children and their families, especially those at risk of disengagement? For example, integrating schools with local health and family support services in a multidisciplinary hub, this would help to re-engage children and their families, and this wraparound support for all family members is what they have recommended. So we know that the past 2 years of COVID amplified the weaknesses in our critical support infrastructure for all of us, especially these families who really need extra help. We now have research showing the negative outcomes on the mental health, learning and wellbeing of many children. COVID demonstrated that policy is typically designed for the concerns of adults, with the unique needs of children often overlooked. Children had no voice and no one representing them at the top table making the decisions during COVID. We have no chief paediatrician and we have no Minister for Children. The United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child asks us to listen to what matters most to children and to give their views due weight. This is how we can design better policy and services. For example, in our recent survey on mental health, children and young people aged 9 to 17 told us that the first people they turn to for help are parents and family. So amongst other actions, we need to equip parents with a better understanding of what they can do to support the mental health of their children. Family relationships are what matters most to children. In fact, Melbourne University researchers heard from children that it's the quality of family relationships that defines for them what the very concept of home means. For children, the impacts of poverty are multidimensional and persistent. ANU Professor Sharon Bessel interviewed children about poverty and heard that relationships are deeply affected by the pressures that poverty creates. Poverty matters to children in ways that we would not have understood if we didn't ask them. In our consultations, children expressed concern about the well-being of their parents and other adults in their family who were unable to get help. And the top 3 barriers to child safety and well-being were lack of affordable, secure housing, lack of access to mental health services, and lack of basic needs such as food and clothing. So what do we need to do to keep children safe and well? Well, I think we know what to do. The problem is we're not doing it. We have a doing problem. It's about accountability for action. For a start, we should implement the evidence-informed recommendations from decades of research, inquiries and royal commissions, and to rise above the excuse of the Federation. Children and their families don't live in one policy silo. Their needs stretch across numerous government portfolios and jurisdictions. That's why it's complex. But we can no longer afford to use complexity as an excuse for not acting on the evidence. Currently, we're spending much more money on late reactions, such as youth detention and child protection systems, instead of investing in prevention and early intervention to keep children safe and well in their families and communities. Our health, education and social service systems are fragmented and not fit for purpose for children and their families, especially those in poverty and disadvantage. Many of these families have told me directly about their frustrations at being unable to access support for their basic needs. A country that values children would be trying hard to address child poverty and to shift investment upstream and earlier, and to redesign the basic systems of support so that kids don't fall in the gaps. Australia has no national plan for child wellbeing and no minister for children. Nor do we have cross-portfolio leadership like a task force to address the system failures which are barriers to child safety and wellbeing. Australia can't continue to just simply tinker around the edges with the symptoms. We need a coordinated national approach to address the underlying causes of harms to children, and we need a much greater sense of urgency. It's puzzling to me that we would not recognise the benefits of doing all we can to improve the basic systems of support for kids and their families. It's not a lack of money that's the barrier, it's about priorities. And it's about spending the money in smarter ways. We need to build a roadmap for cross-portfolio systems redesign, and we need to start now. Otherwise, we'll still be having this same conversation in Child Protection Week 2032 and beyond. It's not enough for us to care about our own children and grandchildren. Mine are very cute, but it's not enough. We need to care about all children and to create the conditions that keep children safe and well. This requires each of us to step up in our own communities and to create the conditions that keep children safe and well, and to expect much more from our elected representatives in government. I'm confident that we can make significant progress on child safety and wellbeing, but I also know that this will not be achieved without significant systems reform. We need to make children a national priority, and I believe we are less of a country if we don't. Thank you very much.
Hello everyone, my name's Teresa Scott and I'm the chair of the NAPCAN board. I would like to extend my deepest gratitude to Their Excellencies for being the patron of our charity, but also for continuing to highlight the issues that are so important about the wellbeing of children and young people in Australia. So thank you very much for continuing to host and launch National Child Protection Week. We missed out the last few years of having an event like this, so it's really nice to see everybody back connecting in real time in space. I was reflecting that this is probably my 20th year of being part of National Child Protection Week, and although Anne has pointed out that there's still so much to do, we have made progress, and there is an enormous amount of knowledge in this room that goes towards creating that motion for change, and that's what we really want to see. But so I'd like to thank Anne for highlighting the systemic issues that are holding us back, and to really continuing the work as the National Children's Commissioner for highlighting the voices of children and young people and what they need to keep them safe and to thrive and to grow up into being the young people that they want to be. So thank you, Anne, for doing that. As NAPCAN's name suggests, we are all about preventing abuse and neglect of children. We want it to stop before it starts. And that takes a whole of community approach, as Anne's pointed out. It takes the researchers, it takes the practitioners, the doctors, the parents, the business, the sporting clubs. It takes everyone to play their part, no matter how small or big. It can be smiling at a child, encouraging a young person to fulfill their dream. These things do make a difference in those relationships that His Excellency pointed out are so important to children thriving. So we want to highlight that simple message that we can prevent child abuse and neglect, and National Child Protection Week is one of those mechanisms for having that conversation and sharing our ideas about what we can do. We know what works, we know what can help, so let's take action and do it. So thank you very much for coming here today. Thank you for whatever you are doing in your role, be it small or big, of protecting children, helping them grow up to be loved, supported in a community that cares for them. So keep up the good work and have a great National Child Protection Week. Thank you.
I've written a song that I'd like to share with you. Every child in every community needs a fair go. Let's shine a light on children. Let's guide and help them grow. Living life in safety, support and loving care. Cared for and connected in a family with love to share. Let's create supportive environment, children safe, feeling loved. Have a positive sense of themselves and the culture they come from. They need material basics, being healthy inside and out, with learning and education, playing games with dreams about. With a national framework in collaboration, we can plan. If all groups get together, our children make a stand. Our children are so precious, let them learn and laugh with joy, protecting and encouraging every girl and boy. Let's help stop child abuse with support and no neglect, with love and caring help, guiding parents with respect. We want our children safe, with a happy life to live, with kindness and with caring. There's so much love to give. Our children are so precious, their future plans they bring. So thank you for helping children. Thank you to everyone in this room who is making a difference in children's lives. It's so important and so special. So thank you.
To Your Excellency. Ladies